How the winds of fate play their tricks, sweeping the sands of time, carrying the stories of both tyrants and the oppressed. But let me not get ahead of myself. I am Spartacus, the name that strikes fear into the hearts of Romans, though I am sure the memory of me they so eagerly buried in history's forgotten crypts. Yes, they've done their best to keep the truth of my life obscured, a tale whispered in the shadows, rather than shouted from the rooftops. But now it's time to unmask myself, to tell you the story of a man who dared to believe that all people deserve freedom, even in a world built on the bones of slaves. My story begins humbly. Born to Thracian parents in the year around the end of the 1st century BC, Thrace, a land as wild and untamed as my spirit, where the mountains cradle the skies and the forests whisper ancient secrets. I was a child of the earth, learning early the ways of war, for in Thrace you either fought or you perished. My father was a warrior, my mother a healer, and I was both and neither. Education? If you count learning to wield a sword before learning to speak, then yes, I was well educated. But formal schooling, that was for the sons of Roman patricians, not for the likes of me. My lessons were written in blood, etched into my flesh by the sharp edge of a blade. As a boy, I dreamed of glory, of battle, of carving out a life with my own hands. I had no idea that the chains of slavery would soon replace the sword in my grip, that my life would become a living paradox, a warrior enslaved, a gladiator who fought not for freedom, but for the amusement of the very people who sought to crush my spirit. But that part of the tale comes later, in due time. For now, let's linger a little longer in my youth, in the days before the storm when I was still a free man, unaware of the chains that would soon bind me. Little did I know, those days of freedom were as fleeting as the wind. A Roman army, seeking to expand their empire, invaded my homeland, and I, like so many others, was caught in their net. Captured, stripped of my name, my dignity, and my freedom, I was sold into slavery. My life's worth measured in silver coins that would have been better spent on a good bottle of wine for all the value they placed on me. And so my journey into the dark heart of Rome began. But this is only the beginning. The real story, the one they've tried so hard to bury, is yet to come. The chains, the whip, the arena, oh yes, the arena, where I would become both a hero and a villain depending on who tells the tale. And tell it I shall, but first, let's explore what it means to be a slave in the heart of the Roman Empire, a world where a man's worth is calculated by the strength of his back and the breadth of his shoulders, where life is cheap, but freedom is priceless. Stay with me, for the journey grows darker but also more enlightening as we delve into the depths of human despair and the heights of human resilience. The fire of rebellion, though still a flicker, is growing within me, and soon, very soon, it will consume all who stand in its path. But for now we must endure the chains a little longer, for they have much to teach us. So you're still with me? Good. We've only scratched the surface, and trust me, the story gets much more interesting from here. After all, the Romans weren't just known for their togas and grand speeches. They were experts in turning free men into beasts of burden, chattel and spectacles of pain. And I, Spartacus, was no exception. Captured, shackled, and paraded like livestock, I was thrown into the pit of Rome's most notorious institution, slavery. To understand what that meant, you must first grasp the sheer brutality of the system. Rome wasn't built in a day, and it certainly wasn't built by free hands. No, it was the sweat, blood, and tears of slaves that erected the grand temples, the sprawling villas, and the mighty aqueducts. We were the invisible foundation, crushed beneath the weight of an empire. There were many kinds of slaves, each with their own special brand of misery. Some, like me, were forced into the blood-soaked sands of the gladiatorial arena, where we fought not for honor, but for the amusement of those who saw us as less than human. Others toiled in the fields, bending their backs under the relentless sun, their bodies breaking long before their spirits. The house slaves who served their masters in domesticity fared no better, though their wounds were often hidden, inflicted not by whips, but by the cold cruelty of indifference. And then there were the unfortunates, those used for the basest pleasures of their masters, their bodies sold and resold, their dignity shattered beyond repair. The cost of a slave varied, you see, depending on age, strength, and what they could offer. A young, strong male like myself might fetch a higher price, perhaps as much as a few hundred denarii. But in truth, we were all just commodities in the eyes of the Romans. My day-to-day life as a gladiator was one of constant torment. I trained under the watchful eyes of my lanista, the man who owned me, preparing for the inevitable day when I would be thrown into the arena to kill or be killed. Each morning began with a ritual of humiliation, stripped bare, inspected like cattle, and fed just enough to keep us alive. The food? Gruel, mostly enough to sustain the muscle but devoid of any joy. Training was a grueling affair. We were pitted against one another, taught to fight with every weapon imaginable. It was here, in the blood-soaked sand, that I first tasted true despair. I was no longer Spartacus, the Thracian warrior. I was Spartacus, the Romans' plaything. Each crack of the whip, each shout from the crowd drove the chains deeper into my soul. But the Romans made one fatal mistake. They underestimated the power of the human spirit. You see, even as they sought to break me, they only succeeded in hardening my resolve. The more they beat me, the stronger my desire for freedom grew. And I was not alone. The whispers of rebellion were already beginning to spread among the slaves, like a spark in dry tinder. I listened, I learned, and I bided my time. The precursor to the rebellion was as inevitable as it was unexpected. A group of us gladiators, slaves from every corner of the empire, began to meet in secret, plotting our escape. We knew the risks. Failure meant death, but to continue living as we were, that was a death in itself. We were pushed to the brink, and there we found our strength. The plan was simple but audacious. We would strike at the heart of the beast, taking what weapons we could and fleeing into the hills, where the Romans' power waned. It was a fool's hope, perhaps, but it was our only hope. And so, the fire of rebellion was lit. A fire that would soon rage across the empire, challenging the very foundation of Roman supremacy. But before we dive into that, let's pause for a moment. Imagine it. A band of slaves, tired, hungry, but fueled by a desire that no chain could bind, preparing to take on the might of Rome. The odds were against us, but we had something Rome could never understand. Nothing left to lose. Next, we'll explore the life of a Roman gladiator. Before I was a rebel, I was a gladiator, a man forced to entertain the masses with my blood, my pain, and, if fortune failed me, my life. The arena was my battlefield, long before I led an army of slaves against Rome. But don't let the romanticized images of glory and honor fool you. There was nothing noble about it. It was a brutal existence, a spectacle of death wrapped in the guise of sport. Let me pull back the curtain and show you the grim reality of what it meant to be a gladiator. When I first entered the Ludus, the training school for gladiators, I was no stranger to hardship, but nothing could have prepared me for the grueling regimen that awaited. Training was relentless, designed to mold us into killing machines ready to face death with cold efficiency. We were drilled in the use of weapons, swords, tridents, nets, each tailored to a particular style of combat. Some of us were trained as murmilos, heavily armed with a sword and shield. Others as retiari, who fought with a trident and net, quick and elusive. Every day we practiced until our bodies ached and our muscles burned, but there was no room for weakness. Weakness meant death. The Ludus was no sanctuary. It was a forge, and we were the iron to be tempered. Our trainers, often former gladiators themselves, were merciless. They pushed us beyond our limits, for they knew that anything less would mean certain death in the arena. And yet, we were valuable property. Investments made by wealthy lanistae who owned and managed the gladiatorial schools. They had a vested interest in keeping us alive, at least, until we had repaid their investment with our blood. But survival was far from guaranteed. The death rate among gladiators was horrifyingly high. Some lasted only a single fight before their blood watered the sands of the arena. Others, the more fortunate or skilled, might survive a few years, becoming celebrities of a sort, admired by the masses and feared by their opponents. But even the most famous gladiators knew that their time would come. The crowd's favor was fickle, and a single misstep could turn cheers into demands for death. As for how we were treated, let's just say that we were somewhere between prized cattle and disposable tools. On one hand, our masters ensured that we were well fed and in peak physical condition, for a gladiator who could not fight was of no use. We were given medical attention, not out of kindness, but to keep us fit for the arena. But on the other hand, we were constantly reminded that we were nothing more than slaves, our lives held in the balance by the whims of our owners and the bloodlust of the crowd. And then there was the strange, grotesque practice that many outsiders find hard to believe: the selling of gladiator sweat. Yes, you heard that right. Our sweat, mixed with the dust and blood of the arena, was collected and sold as an aphrodisiac. The Romans believed that the essence of a gladiator, his virility, his strength, could be absorbed through the skin. It was a bizarre, almost comical belief, but to us it was just another reminder of how dehumanized we had become. We were not just fighters, we were commodities, our very bodies exploited in every possible way. But let's not dwell too long on the absurdity. The reality of life as a gladiator was far from amusing. It was a life lived on the edge, where death was a constant companion. Every time I stepped into the arena, I knew that it could be my last. The roar of the crowd, the blinding sun, the feel of the sand beneath my feet, all of it became a part of me, a second skin that I could never shed. Yet in that crucible of violence, something unexpected happened. I found a sense of camaraderie among my fellow gladiators, men who, like me, had been stripped of their freedom and forced to fight for their lives. We were rivals in the arena, but outside of it we were brothers. We shared our fears, our hopes, our desperate dreams of escape. And in those moments I realized that we were more than just slaves, we were men, human beings who deserved better than this brutal existence. It was that realization that planted the seed of rebellion in my heart. The arena may have been a place of death, but it was also a place of awakening. I saw in the eyes of my fellow gladiators the same desire for freedom that burned within me. And I knew with a certainty that no amount of fear could shake, that I would rather die fighting for that freedom than live another day as a tool of Rome's bloodthirsty games. So when the opportunity finally came to break free, to turn the tools of our oppression against our oppressors, I did not hesitate. The arena had taught me well. It had shown me the value of life, the strength of brotherhood, and the indomitable will to survive. And it had made one thing clear. Rome's greatest mistake was not in making me a gladiator, but in underestimating what a gladiator could become when he finally seized his freedom. As you continue with this journey, remember that the story of Spartacus is not just about rebellion or revenge. It is about the fight for dignity, for humanity, for the right to live and die as a free person. The gladiatorial games may have been meant to entertain, to distract, to demonstrate the power of Rome, but in the end, they revealed something far more powerful: the unbreakable spirit of those who refuse to be enslaved. And so my tale continues, not as a mere recounting of events, but as a testament to the enduring struggle for freedom. The arena was just the beginning. The real battle, the one that still rages on, was for the soul of humanity itself. What followed was a tale of defiance, of battles won and lost, of a man who became a symbol of freedom. But that, my friends, is a story for the next chapter. Stay with me, for the rebellion is about to begin, and Rome is not ready for what's coming. And so the stage was set. Rome in all its arrogance never saw us coming. How could they? We were mere slaves, faceless and forgotten tools to be used and discarded. But the truth, as they say, has a funny way of revealing itself. And Rome, for all its might, was about to learn that the truth of freedom, once ignited, is a fire that can never be extinguished. It began one fateful night in 73 BC. We had planned meticulously, each detail scrutinized over whispered conversations in the darkness of our quarters. The gladiators, those who had been beaten into submission, were now my brothers in arms. Our weapons? Whatever we could find. Kitchen knives, farming tools, even our bare hands if need be. But our greatest weapon was not forged from iron or steel. It was forged from our collective will to live as men, not as property. Our first act of rebellion was swift and brutal. We overwhelmed the guards, their surprise turning to terror as we turned their own weapons against them. It was a slaughter, yes, but a necessary one. In the eyes of the Romans, we were no longer slaves. We were traitors, rebels, enemies of the state. And so we fled, with nothing but the clothes on our backs and the fire of freedom in our hearts. Rome, of course, was not going to take this insurrection lightly. They sent soldiers' legions, even to hunt us down, to crush the rebellion before it could grow. But they underestimated us once again. We were not a ragtag group of escaped slaves. We were an army bound not by chains, but by a shared vision of a world where no man would bow to another. The hills of Vesuvius became our fortress, our sanctuary. More slaves joined our cause, swelling our numbers until we were a force to be reckoned with. The battles that followed were hard-fought, bloody, and relentless. We defeated one Roman army after another, their once invincible legions shattered by the fury of men who had nothing left to lose. We turned the very weapons of our oppressors against them, and with each victory our confidence grew. But there was something more, a truth that Rome had hidden, or perhaps had forgotten in its thirst for power. It wasn't just our chains that bound us. It was the lie that some men were born to rule while others were born to serve. We, the slaves, had shattered that lie, and with every Roman soldier that fell before us, the truth spread like wildfire. We weren't just fighting for our freedom. We were fighting to unmask the hypocrisy of an empire that claimed to be the beacon of civilization, while it thrived on the suffering of the weak. Rome, of course, responded with the full force of its military might. They sent their best generals, men like Crassus and Pompey, to crush us once and for all. The battles grew fiercer, and the cost of our rebellion became clear. We were outnumbered, outgunned, and surrounded on all sides. Yet even in the face of certain defeat, we fought on. For we knew that our fight was not just for ourselves, but for all those who had ever tasted the bitter draught of slavery. But I would be lying if I said we were not afraid. As the noose tightened around us, I saw the fear in the eyes of my brothers. The hope that had once burned so brightly now flickered like a dying ember. We knew that the end was near, that Rome would not rest until every last one of us was hunted down. But still we fought. We fought because we knew that even in death we would be free. And in that freedom, we would find victory. Yet here is where the irony of my story lies. For in our quest to free ourselves, we had become the very thing we despised. The battles, the bloodshed, the endless cycle of violence, it had consumed us. The line between the oppressor and the oppressed had blurred, and we who had once fought for justice now wielded the sword of vengeance. Rome had forced us to become what we never wanted to be, warriors in a war that could have no winners. The final battle was upon us. We knew it would be our last stand, a fight to the death. But as I stood there, sword in hand, surrounded by the men who had become my family, I realized something. Rome may defeat us, they may even crucify us along their roads, but they would never truly break us. For our rebellion, our fight, had already planted the seed of doubt in the heart of the empire, and that seed would grow long after we were gone. What happened in that final battle, and what became of Spartacus, the slave who dared to defy Rome, I'll save for the next chapter. Stay with me, for the end is near. But the legacy of our struggle is just beginning, and Rome, for all its power, will never be the same. The final chapter of my life was written in blood, etched onto the battlefield where the sun itself seemed to dim in sorrow. The year was 71 BC, and the rebellion that had shaken the foundations of Rome was drawing to a close. But let me not deceive you, though the end was near. The fire in our hearts had not yet been extinguished. We knew that death was certain, yet we faced it with the courage that only those who have tasted freedom can muster. The Roman legions, led by Crassus, encircled us like wolves closing in on their prey. Our numbers had dwindled, our resources were scarce, and hope, that fickle mistress, had all but deserted us. Yet as I looked upon my brothers, the men who had fought and bled alongside me, I felt no fear, only a deep, abiding sorrow that our struggle would not see the light of a new dawn. We were trapped, surrounded on all sides by the very empire we had sought to dismantle. Crassus, that arrogant patrician, had spared no expense in ensuring that our defeat would be absolute. He wanted a spectacle, a final act in the tragedy that was our rebellion, and he would get it. But he would also get something he did not expect: our defiance, our refusal to surrender even in the face of overwhelming odds. As the battle began, the air was thick with the stench of sweat, blood, and fear. The Romans, with their disciplined ranks and gleaming armor, advanced upon us. their faces hidden behind helmets that betrayed no emotion. But we were anything but faceless. We were the living embodiment of Rome's sins, the ghosts of every slave who had ever suffered under the yoke of oppression. The clash was brutal, the sound of steel on steel echoing across the battlefield like the tolling of a death knell. We fought with a ferocity born of desperation, every strike a testament to our refusal to be cowed. But for every Roman soldier that fell, 2 more took his place, and soon the ground beneath our feet was slick with the blood of my comrades. It was in the midst of this carnage that I met my fate. I fought as I had always fought, with every ounce of strength and skill I possessed. But even the greatest of warriors cannot withstand the tide of an empire. A Roman spear found its mark, piercing through my side, and I fell to my knees, the world spinning around me. As I looked up, I saw Crassus watching from a distance, his face a mask of cold indifference. In that moment, I knew that my time had come. But even as the darkness closed in, I did not feel regret. My life, brief though it was, had been lived on my terms. I had fought for something greater than myself, for the freedom of all who had suffered as I had. And in that fight, I had found a purpose that no Roman could ever take away. Rome, of course, wasted no time in proclaiming their victory. They crucified my men, 6,000 of them, along the Appian Way, a grim reminder of the price of rebellion. My body, they say, was never found. Perhaps it was left to rot on the battlefield, or perhaps the gods themselves spirited it away. It doesn't matter. What matters is that Rome thought they had killed me. But they were wrong. Spartacus did not die that day. You see, Rome may have crushed the rebellion, but they could not crush the idea that drove it. The idea that all men, regardless of their birth, deserve to be free. That idea, once ignited, can never be extinguished. It will live on, long after the last Roman soldier has turned to dust. And so even in death I live. I live in the hearts of those who continue the fight for freedom, in every corner of the world where oppression still reigns. But what of my legacy? What of the name Spartacus, that Rome sought to erase from history? But that is the sweet irony of it all. Rome may have tried to bury me, but in doing so they only ensured that my story would be told and retold, passed down through the ages as a symbol of resistance. My name, once whispered in fear, became a rallying cry for those who would stand against tyranny. In America, centuries later, the horrors of slavery would rear their ugly head once more. But even there, in the land of the free, the spirit of Spartacus would find new life. For though Roman slavery and American chattel slavery were worlds apart, the suffering was the same: the dehumanization, the brutality, the denial of basic human rights. But so too was the resistance, the unyielding desire for freedom that no chain could bind. And so as I lay dying on that battlefield, I knew that my death was not the end. It was only the beginning. Rome had won the battle, but the war for freedom would continue long after they had fallen into ruin. Stay with me, for the story of Spartacus is far from over. There is still the matter of legacy to discuss, and what became of the empire that once thought itself invincible. And of course there is still the question of why this story, my story, matters today. But for now, let us leave the battlefield and move toward the future, a future that I, Spartacus, helped to shape. They say that history is written by the victors, but I beg to differ. The truth is, history is written by those who endure. Rome may have won the battle against me and my fellow rebels, but they did not win the war for freedom. The real victory lies not in the might of the sword, but in the power of the idea, a truth that no empire can ever fully conquer. And so my legacy was born not in the annals of Roman glory, but in the hearts and minds of those who came after me. My name, Spartacus, became a symbol of resistance, a banner under which countless oppressed people would march. Though Rome sought to erase me, to crucify my memory as they had crucified my comrades, they only succeeded in making me immortal. The story of Spartacus, the slave who dared to defy an empire, was passed down through generations, whispered in hushed tones, told in secret, and eventually shouted from the rooftops. From the slave revolts of ancient times to the abolitionist movements of modern history, my spirit has lived on in every fight for justice, every struggle against oppression. But let us not be naive. My story, like all stories, has been twisted and turned by those who sought to use it for their own ends. Rome, in all its hypocrisy, eventually co-opted my image, turning me into a tragic hero rather than a threat to their way of life. But make no mistake, what I fought for was not tragedy but change. I was no hero. I was a man driven by the simple desire to be free, to live as a human being rather than as a piece of property. And what of Rome? That great empire that once ruled the known world with an iron fist? In the end, Rome fell, as all empires do. The seeds of its destruction were sown not by external enemies, but by the very rot at its core. The rot of inequality, of slavery, of a system that valued wealth and power above all else. My rebellion may not have toppled Rome, but it revealed the cracks in its foundation. It showed the world that even the mightiest of empires could be brought to its knees by the power of the human spirit. As for me, I became a legend. My name was invoked by those who sought to challenge the status quo, to fight for the rights of the downtrodden. In the centuries that followed, the tale of Spartacus would inspire countless movements, slave revolts, peasant uprisings, and revolutions against tyranny. Even in the New World across the seas, where slavery took on a new, even more brutal form, my story found new relevance. American chattel slavery, with its dehumanizing brutality, was in many ways a darker mirror of Roman slavery. The forced labor, the whippings, the dehumanization, all of it echoed the horrors I had witnessed in the gladiator pits and on the plantations. But in America, as in Rome, there were those who resisted, slaves who ran away, who fought back, who refused to be broken. And in their resistance, I saw echoes of my own struggle. The abolitionists who fought to end slavery in America drew inspiration from many sources, but my story was among them. Spartacus, the gladiator who defied an empire, became a symbol of the fight for freedom, a symbol that resonated across time and place. And when the shackles of slavery were finally broken, when the last slave was freed, I knew that my legacy had come full circle. But let us not fool ourselves into thinking that the fight is over. Slavery, in one form or another, still exists in this world. It may not always take the form of chains and whips, but it is there in the exploitation of labor, in the denial of basic human rights, in the systems that dehumanize and oppress. The fight for freedom is an ongoing one, and it is up to each generation to take up the mantle and continue the struggle. So what then is the true legacy of Spartacus? It is not my name or my deeds or even my rebellion. It is the idea that no man, no woman, no child should ever be a slave. It is the belief that freedom is not a privilege to be granted by the powerful, but a right to be claimed by the powerless. And it is the knowledge that even in the darkest of times, the human spirit can rise above oppression and reach for something greater. Rome may have buried my body, but they could not bury my spirit. And as long as there are those who fight for freedom, who resist tyranny, who refuse to bow to the chains of oppression, the legacy of Spartacus will live on. But before we conclude, let us pause and reflect on what this means for us today. The world has changed much since the days of Rome, but the struggle for justice, for equality, for freedom remains as urgent as ever. And in that struggle, we must remember the lessons of history. Lessons that Rome, in all its arrogance, failed to learn. And now, as we stand at the crossroads of past and future, let us prepare to take the final step on this journey. There is one more chapter to be told, one last message to be shared. Stay with me, for the conclusion of this tale is not merely the end of a story. It is a call to action, a reminder that the fight for freedom is far from over. As we stand here looking back over the centuries, what remains of Spartacus? Certainly not the flesh and blood, for I was but a man, and men are destined to return to the earth. But the essence, the spirit, the idea, these are what endure. My legacy is carved not in stone monuments or statues, but in the hearts and minds of all who yearn for freedom. But let us not romanticize this too much, shall we? I did not rise from the dust of Thrace to become a symbol. No, I was simply a man driven by the unbearable weight of chains, a man who refused to bow to the gods of oppression. My rebellion was not born out of some grand vision of a better world. It was born out of necessity, out of the need to reclaim what had been stolen from me and countless others. Rome, of course, had other ideas. They sought to turn my story into a cautionary tale, a reminder of what happens to those who dare to defy the might of the empire. But irony, that ever-faithful companion, had other plans. For in trying to erase me, Rome only ensured that my story would live on, passed down through the ages as a symbol of resistance. And now as you hear these words, perhaps in the comfort of your home or on the move, I urge you to remember that my story is not just a relic of the past. It is a mirror, reflecting the struggles of the present and the challenges of the future. For though the chains may have changed, the battle for freedom remains as fierce as ever. Consider for a moment the differences between the world of Rome and the world of today. Rome was a society built on slavery, where human beings were reduced to mere property, their worth determined by their utility to their masters. America, centuries later, would take this concept to even more brutal extremes, with chattel slavery that tore families apart and treated people as less than human. And yet in both worlds, the desire for freedom burned bright, igniting rebellions and fueling movements that would eventually lead to change. But what of today? Slavery in its traditional form may have been abolished, but new forms of slavery and oppression have taken its place. Whether it's the exploitation of workers, the denial of basic rights, or the systemic injustices that continue to plague our societies, the fight for freedom is far from over. And it is up to each of us to take up that fight, to continue the struggle that began so many centuries ago. And racism, a dark chapter of history, was not around in my day. That wasn't made up until the 19th century, a sort of justification for slavery and discrimination that continues to this day. In my day, we all saw each other as fellow humans, as part of one lineage. As your modern science and study of genetics confirms, so where does that leave us? Here at the crossroads of history and the future, with a choice to make. Will we, like Rome, turn a blind eye to the suffering of others, content in our own comfort? Or will we, like Spartacus, rise up and demand something better, not just for ourselves but for all of humanity? As you ponder this, I invite you to walk in my footsteps, not just metaphorically but literally. The remnants of Rome still stand, their grandeur a testament to an empire that once ruled the world. The ruins of Capua, where my rebellion began, can still be visited, as can the Appian Way, where my comrades were crucified. These sites are more than just tourist attractions. They are places of memory, reminders of the cost of resistance and the price of freedom. But let us not stop there. To truly understand the legacy of Spartacus, one must also explore the legacy of slavery in America, from the plantations of the South to the battlefields of the Civil War. Visit these places, not as a casual observer, but as a pilgrim on a journey of understanding. For it is only by confronting the past that we can hope to shape a better future. As we conclude this journey, I leave you with a final thought, one that I hope will linger in your mind long after you've finished watching. The fight for freedom is not a relic of the past. It is the defining struggle of our present and our future. It is a fight that transcends time, culture, and geography, uniting all who seek justice in a common cause. Thank you for joining me on this journey through history, through my story. Our channel, known as the Renaissance Spirit, is dedicated to the pursuits of a just, equitable, and humanitarian world. We explore the intersections of history, politics, religion, personal development, society, culture, and social and environmental justice. Ancient Rome, as we've seen, offers a powerful lens through which to view the modern world, a comparison that reveals both how far we've come and how far we still have to go. The Renaissance ushered in a golden age, a time of rediscovery and enlightenment, where knowledge lost to time was found once more, and new ideas were born. It gave rise to the Age of Reason and Humanism, movements that challenged the status quo and sought to uplift humanity. Today, as we face our own challenges, we must embrace this same spirit, the Renaissance spirit and ethos, not just of learning, but of living, growing, and thinking with compassion and understanding. So I ask you, not as Spartacus, the historical figure, but as a fellow traveler on this journey, will you take up the mantle? Will you live the Renaissance spirit? If so, join us, subscribe, turn on notifications, and share this message with others. Explore the other videos on our channel. Dive into the stories that shape our world, and let us know in the comments what you take away from them. And if you're curious, take the quiz next to see if you're a true Renaissance spirit. For the path to a better world begins with a single step one that each of us must take in our own way. Live the Renaissance spirit, my friends. The fight for freedom, for justice, for a better world, it is a fight worth waging. And it is a fight that belongs to all of us. Vive Renaissance spiritus, historia non et mortua, sed intellectus nostrum.
I was born beneath the iron sky, Thrace angelorum carignae inoculo. In Thrace I learned to fight and bleed, but never to submit, never to concede. I rose against the Roman might, brothers at my side, for what is right. In every heart a flame was lit, for freedom's cause we would never quit. I rose against the Roman might, brothers at my side, for what is right. In every heart a flame was lit, for freedom's cause we would never quit. Libertas uguagliat, in altum volat, may freedom never die, may it soar on high, through every slave's cry, under every sky. Let it echo through the years, wipe away our tears. May freedom never die, may it cover all our fears. Libertas uguagliat, immortus nostros vincat. They broke my body, but not my soul. In death I found my ultimate goal. For every drop of blood I shed, a seed of freedom in hearts was fed. Pro libertate, nunquam desisteremo. Surrexit contra Romanum potentiam, cum fratribus meis prorecto. In omni corde flammations est, libertas nunquam pereat, timorus nostros vincat. Spartacus, in chains no more, my spirit lives, forever to soar. In every heart, where hope abides, may freedom live, where justice resides. May freedom never die, may it soar on high, through every slave's cry, under every sky. Let it echo through the years, wipe away our tears. May freedom never die, may it conquer all our fears. Libertas nunquam pereat, in altum volat, reclamorem servorum, sub omni cielo sonat. Resonet per annos, lacrimos nostras obluat. Libertas nunquam pereat, timores nostros vincat. Spartacus, non amplius vinctus, spiritus meus vivi, semper volaturus. In omni corde, ubi spes manet, libertas vivat, ubi justitia regnat. Spartacus, non amplius vinctus, spiritus meus vivi, semper volaturus. In omni corde, ubi spes monet, libertas vivat, ubi justitia regnat. Spartacus, in chains no more, my spirit lives.